Thank you all for coming out tonight for Historic St. Mary's City's lecture series. My name is Peter Friesen, Director of Education. We typically have one lecture a month, but this one happened to fall in our laps. And when it's so near and dear to the history, we can't say no to that. So I hope everyone enjoys that. But I want to take care of a little housekeeping. First and foremost, we all have these nifty devices, or not nifty devices, depending on how you look at it. But if you got one, can you please put it on silent? The presentation is being recorded, and once our IT department or marketing department has time to edit it, they also have last week's lecture to edit. They haven't had a chance to do that one yet. So they've got two to do, so just give them some patience, but they will be posted on our YouTube channel for you to share and watch as many times as you want for free. Other than that, this presentation, like many of our lectures, is supported by the generous support of the Historic St. Mary's City Foundation, and they are gearing up for their largest annual fundraiser, Beer Fest. All right, here's exciting. Beer Fest is a wonderful, wonderful way the foundation raises money to help support lectures like this, research programs that our archaeologists do, and other educational programming. And because of that, Beer Fest can't all be done on its own. It does need some volunteer help. And so if anyone is able to, we ask that you please volunteer to help Beer Fest, because ultimately you are helping the mission of Historic St. Mary's City. So with that being said, I'd like to invite Dr. Henry Miller to come up and introduce our guest speaker for the night.
Well, good evening, everybody. Great to see a nice crowd here about a subject that many of us know something about, or thought we knew something about. Van Sweringen has a deep place in St. Mary's City history. His site was the first 17th century site displayed to the public in 1934. His was the second 17th century site he excavated. He was one of the most prominent citizens of St. Mary's City, and we have asked many questions about him. We've done diligent research, and we have come up with no answers to many questions. But that ended about a month ago. I received an email from a gentleman from the Netherlands who was interested in a guy named Garret Van Sweringen. And he offered, is it on? Okay, offered to come here. And said, absolutely. So tonight, we're going to hear for the first time in America a presentation by a dedicated researcher who, during the day, is the CEO of the information technology company, but at other times is a diligent researcher into ancient books. And he is Van der Vorm of Rotterdam, who is president of the Dutch Genealogical Association, having over 1,600 members, a very major study group. But he has explored in a way none of us have been able to get at the story of Garret Van Sweringen from the other side of the Atlantic. So it is my grand pleasure to introduce our speaker tonight to you.
Thank you very much for this nice introduction, ladies and gentlemen. It's my honor and pleasure to be here and share with you the results of my research into Garret Van Sweringen. And like there are many ways to write his name, there are also many ways to pronounce his name. So in the Netherlands we say Van Sweringen. In the US we normally say Van Sweringen. And I sometimes do something in between, Van Sweringen. So I will mix that up, and I hope you don't mind if I do that. Just to start, are there any Van Sweringens or Sweringens in the room? Yes? Ah, very nice. I have to admit, today is the first time in my life that I ever see the first time that I see a Van Sweringen in real life. I've been studying, I studied the family for many years now, but yeah, today very special for me as well. In 1 hour, I will guide you through his life, adventures, and ancestors. He has left many traces in archives, in archaeological finds, and visits many descendants living today. In fact, 1 hour is too short for his life. This man experienced more in a year than most of us experience in our whole lifetime. So I have selected key episodes from his life, both in the Netherlands, in the Dutch colony of Newer Amstel, and in Maryland. And I hope you find this guy as fascinating and intriguing as I do. And I made an AI image of how he might have looked like. We don't have a portrait of him, so this is artificial intelligence. Henry told me it cannot be this way, but just to have an impression. So, in introduction, Henry told already a lot. My name is Teun from Vorm, Rotterdam. I'm traveling with my wife Clarice. She's sitting in front here. We're traveling to the US now. And besides having this as our vacation, we also do some research, or I do some research. So 2-3 hours a day, I sometimes go to an archive, to Delaware State, or Delaware Public Archive, to Maryland State Archives. And also today we had a wonderful tour. He showed us St. Mary City, so that was very, very interesting. And for more than 25 years, I'm doing all kind of research, family research, mainly in the western part of the Netherlands. I regularly publish articles about it. So my interest in Garret Van Sweringen, how did that happen? 3 years ago, I was asked by an old friend of me, his name was Hank, and he was then 92 years old. He sadly passed away last year. If I could help him with a problem he couldn't get solved. And he was descending from a Hendrik Van Sweringen, or a Hendrik in Dutch, Hendrik Van Sweringen, who was a court messenger in the village of Vorm. It's a little village near Leiden, Netherlands. And it was my pleasure to help him, also because I like to solve this kind of brick walls in genealogy. And it took some effort, but ultimately I was able to find the ancestors of this Hendrik Van Sweringen. Then in the process of research, you sometimes Google a name and see what happens. And when you Google on Van Sweringen, in all kinds of spellings, you get a lot of hits about the 17th century Garret Van Sweringen in the US. And I visited some websites with information about him and learned that he lived in New Netherlands, afterwards moved to Maryland, and also that he's the ancestor of really thousands of Americans. And also that here in historic St. Mary City, he's a key historic figure, and you can visit his inn and learn more about his life. So he's quite famous in Maryland, but hardly known in the Netherlands. And after reading all kinds of pieces of information scattered around on the internet, you can conclude that Garret Van Sweringen had a very busy and intriguing life, and must have been a fascinating personality. And as a researcher, I found two things particularly surprising to discover about a so well-known person. First, you find a lot of mistakes in online and written information about him. It's incredible. And secondly, although it's known that he came from the Netherlands, nobody was able to find his ancestors. And despite many efforts made by amateur and professional genealogists in the last 100 years. So both elements motivated me to start researching Garret van Sweringen. And firstly, as a mathematician, I studied mathematics. I wanted to structure and verify all information about his life. And secondly, I wanted to give it a try to find his ancestors in the Netherlands. And so what started as a little bit of Googling around for Van Sweringen ended up in a fascinating search. And my wife calls it an addiction. I think a lot of people do genealogy the same addiction. And the first results of my research were published this January in a 40-page article in the Dutch magazine Ons Volksblad. You see the article here with the picture of the dove, which is the replica here in the harbor. And so for this evening, we have two topics. First, I will tell you about his fascinating life and adventures. And secondly, I will tell you about the search for his ancestors in the Netherlands. I will devote about 25 minutes to each of these topics. And so we have also time left for questions. So we first go to his life and adventures. And before I can tell you about it, we have to go back in time 400 years. We have to go back to the colony of New Netherlands. And I need to give you some historical context about it. From the beginning of the 17th century, the English, the Dutch, and other nations had been trading with the native people of America. The English started subsequently with colonization. For example, in 1634, the first colonists arrived here in Maryland with the Ark and the Dove. The Dutch West Indian Company, who had the monopoly on trading with America, wanted to do the same to avoid being overrun by the English colonists. I'll shortly explain the map. You see in the middle, you see New Amsterdam, and I think you know that is currently New York. If you go to the south, you see Delaware, and there you have the city of New Amstel. New Amstel is Newer Amstel. That was a Dutch city colony. At the north, you have New England. There's Massachusetts, Connecticut, things like that. And in the bottom left corner, you see Maryland. The Dutch West Indies Company allowed other parties under a license to build their own colony within the Dutch territory. The city of Amsterdam was owed money from the West Indian Company, mainly due to the rental of their warship that the West Indian Company needed to drive out the Swedish from the Delaware region, and was in return allowed in 1656 to start their own colony in New Netherlands, which they called Newer Amstel. So it was a colony of the city of Amsterdam. And the city, it's very surprising. Amsterdam was a city that both had its own colony and also had its own warships. So it demonstrates the power of the city of Amsterdam in the 17th century. You also see on the river, on the slide, a couple of rivers. On the top bottom, you see the Verse Rivier. I think that's Connecticut River. Then you see the North Rivier, more or less in the middle. That's the Hudson River nowadays. And you see the South Rivier, that's the Delaware River. So these were the old names the Dutch used for these colonies. So the city of Amsterdam had their colony, and end of 1656, they sent the first ships to bring goods and colonists to this Newer Amstel colony. And guess who was on board of one of these ships? That was Garret Van Sweringen. He was then about 20 years old and was appointed by the Dutch West Indian Company as a supercargo. And a supercargo is the person on board of a ship that was responsible for the correct handling and administration of the cargo. So this is the first sign of life that we have, that I was able to find about Garret van Sweringen. On the slide to the left, you see a drawing of the type of ship for which Garret was supercargo. It's called a flute ship, and it was a Dutch ship type regularly used to cross the oceans. And on the right side, I think you cannot read it because it's all 17th century Dutch. But you can give it a try. You see two lists of goods, and there are four remaining lists that Garret had to oversee. That were the goods that were brought to the colony of Newer Amstel. And we can read that they took to the new colony, for example, 16 barrels of meat, 350 pounds of cheese, I think it will be Dutch cheese, 400 pair of shoes, 200 pair of Icelandic socks that were really warm compared to the Dutch socks, 75 guns, 2,000 pounds of gunpowder, so it was very important to defend themselves, and 400 pounds of bullets. So far so good for the preparation. The ship left the Netherlands in December 1656 with approximately 120 colonists to bring to the new colony. And of course Garret van Sweringen was on board of that ship. It was a tough sail, and things went even worse when they reached the American coast in March 1657. Due to stormy weather and an inexperienced captain, the ship stranded on the coast of Long Island. Luckily, all passengers survived, and they were able to reach New Amsterdam. And here Garret was allowed to resign from his function as a supercargo, because the ship was destroyed. So normally as a supercargo, we would have gone back with the ship, so we would have never ended up here in Maryland. So it's a coincidence that he came on with him. And I think one of the reasons that Garret decided to stay is that during his journey on board of the ship, he met Alexander de Hinojosa. He later became the director of the city colony of Newer Amstel, who in subsequent years is mentioned as a close friend to Garret van Sweringen. And probably he convinced Garret to stay and start an adventure in the New World. End of April 1657, they ultimately reached the colony, took possession of an existing fort, and renamed it to Newer Amstel. On the slide, you see how the fort and the settlements at that time might have looked. It's drawn by the artist Len Tantillo, and this man made a career out of drawing historical New Netherlands sceneries in a realistic way as far as possible. Garret settled near the fort and started to work in the West Indian Company warehouse, but was 2 years later promoted to sheriff of Newer Amstel. In Dutch it's called schout, but we translate it to sheriff. He was promoted to sheriff of Newer Amstel. And also in 1659 he married to a lady called Barbara de Burrell, a French lady from Valenciennes in France. So far so good. 1 year later, Garret was sent on a mission to Amsterdam in the Netherlands to convince the government of Amsterdam to invest more in the colony. On the trip to his homeland, Garret took on board with him, among other things, 21 beaver pelts for trading, for personal trading. So as we learned from the archives, he would never waste an opportunity to do some private business as well. In Amsterdam, he was successful in convincing the authorities. They decided to invest more money in the colony and send more colonists. On the slide, you see the first 42.5 persons. I will explain that later. Going as passenger to Newer Amstel on the same ship as Garret. Most of them are new colonists. So you might wonder where this half comes from. That's because of small children. They were counted as half. So for example, on the line of Garret Sanderson, I think it's somewhere in the middle, you see the 4.5. With some arithmetic, you can deduce that he had 3 small children and 1 older child. And on the bottom right, you see the signature of Garret van Sweringen. He signed this list of persons. But what is surprising that his name is mentioned on the first line. You see Garret van Sweringen, and he writes it in a different way. It's SCHW. And I think he wrote this list himself, so he used 2 different spellings. Very surprising. This is also the only time that he went back to the Netherlands, as far as we can find from the archives. Then he went back to Newer Amstel, to the colony. And there he continues his work in the warehouse and as a sheriff. In the years that followed, the most controversial incident of his life cannot go unmentioned. On an October evening in 1662, it was around 10 o'clock in the evening, 3 soldiers walk happily singing past the house of Sheriff Garret van Sweringen, who, already irritated by earlier events that evening, orders them to stop singing. The soldiers refuse to comply. We are walking on the public road. Why shouldn't you sing here? And after which the sheriff orders them again to stop, or he would beat them up. Harmen Hendrickson from Deventer, that's the name of one of the soldiers, then shouts to Van Sweringen, "If you are a hero, then come outside." He had barely said these words when the sheriff took his gun and shot towards the soldiers. And Herman was hit and fatally injured. He died the next day, but not without making a statement about this event under oath. Despite Garret van Sweringen's statement that he had shot accidentally, many were not convinced. A formal complaint of murder was filed to the Director General of New Netherlands, Peter Stuyvesant. I think you have heard of this name. And Stuyvesant had Van Sweringen removed from office, and he had also had to surrender his sword. All sheriffs in the Netherlands had a sword. The case was then submitted to the mayors of Amsterdam as the highest court over the New Amstel colony. And they ruled differently. They concluded that his manslaughter took place in self-defense and ex officio, so that's because of his job as a sheriff. So Garret was reinstated as sheriff of Newer Amstel. And we cannot escape the impression that his friendship with the director of the colony, his name I mentioned earlier, Alexander de Hinojosa, played an important role in his rehabilitation. And on the slide, you see the official complaint against Garret van Sweringen, also in Old Dutch. Don't try to read it, but just as an illustration. And the officials are demanding for his arrest. Because of a great fire in the New York State Library in Albany, 1911, a lot of old Dutch documents were lost or severely damaged. And you see the impact of the fire on the edges of the document. So the great part is still preserved, but we have also a lot of documents that were forever lost. Garret van Sweringen is also known as a diplomat. We already know that he had contact with people in Maryland before he moved here. One of the occasions is mentioned in a letter to Peter Stuyvesant, the Director General of the Netherlands. And you can read it here, I shall read it. On the 12th of August 1663, at the invitation of Mr. Van Sweringen, several chiefs, the English governor, that's Charles Calvert at that moment, and Van Sweringen held council to renew the Treaty of Peace and Friendship, which was made 2 years ago. Mr. Van Sweringen also attempted at this meeting to establish boundaries according to instructions from his superiors. He receives as a reply that they would write to the old Lord Baltimore about it. And that old Lord Baltimore refers to Cecil Calvert, who was at that time 2nd Baron Baltimore and Lord Proprietor of Maryland, who lived in England. So I think it will take a long time before they get the answer, if we get his answer at all. And we should realize that Garret is only 27 years old at that moment, and he had an important mission, securing the safety for the Dutch colonists in Newer Amstel. We will soon, however, see that the danger did not come from the people from Maryland. It came from another direction. And that's in August 1664. The city of New Amsterdam was conquered by the English. In the following October, 2 English ships arrived in front of the Fort Newer Amstel, where Garret lived. A statement of 3 witnesses in the notarial archives of Amsterdam tells us in detail what happened. The handwriting here is very hard to read. Don't try it, just as an illustration. But it's possible to decipher. And after some negotiation attempts, the Dutch decided to defend themselves. That's different from New Amsterdam. New Amsterdam they just negotiated a good deal. But Newer Amstel decided to defend. But after some time, when they saw the superior force and troops, they decided to stop their resistance. In yellow, you see the name in the statement of Garret van Sweringen mentioned. And I will read part of the statement where Garret is mentioned, so I have a translation. So this is part of the conquest of Newer Amstel in 1664. The next day, about 8 o'clock in the morning, about 130 English soldiers landed and marched around the fort to the rear of the farmhouse of the fort. At about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, some cannon shots were fired from the ships through the roofs of the houses in the fort, and the English soldiers who were on land climbed over the rear wall, whereupon Sheriff Van Sweringen and Ensign Peter Eldridge jumped over the walls and began to run. I will explain, that's very smart. In climbing over the wall of the fort, the English in their fury killed some of the people and wounded many. At 4 o'clock in the afternoon, the fort was taken by the English by storm and all the people were plundered. So this is a historical account of what happened at that date in October 1664. Together with information from other sources, I interpreted this that Garret put up resistance, probably even fired at the English soldiers, and when he saw they couldn't be stopped, he wisely chose to jump over the wall and flee. Because of his resistance, almost all his goods were taken by the English. We also read in English reports of that time that because of his resistance, Garret's goods were given to the English Captain John Carr for his role in the conquest of Newer Amstel. So he had nothing left after this event. And I will show you a second fragment from this same notarial statement. It's a bit out of context, but it gives insight in the relation between the Dutch and the English people in Maryland at that time. The first deponent is the first guy giving the statement. Declared that 3 or 4 months before the surrender of the Fort Newer Amstel, the governor Alexander Hinojosa traded with the English in Maryland Spanish wine, brandy, Rochelle, which is French wine, linen, stockings, shoes, shirts, etc. for tobacco of the best quality. So that's where you have to go to Maryland for tobacco of the best quality. At 2 stivers a pound, which the English were to deliver at the proper season. And that thus he had sold some hundreds of guilders worth of merchandise to the English, for which as yet no payment has been received. In this case, the Dutch delivered a lot of goods to the people in Maryland, but didn't yet get paid the agreed tobacco. I think you still owe us this tobacco. Unless you can prove that you pay it to us. After the fall of Newer Amstel, Garret van Sweringen, then about 30 years old, moved with his wife Barbara and 2 children to Maryland. As a Catholic, this was a logical choice for him. Moreover, we have seen that he had previous contacts with people in Maryland. In Maryland, he settled at a 200-acre plantation in Talbot County. Apparently, somehow, he must have acquired money again. I don't know how he did that, but he was able to set it to work and to buy his plantation. He sold his plantation in 1667. Then he turns up here in St. Mary's City, then the capital of Maryland, where he lived for the rest of his life. He's mentioned there several hundreds of times in archive documents. Lots of them concern legal proceedings that he himself conducts, usually for payment, or in which he is sued also for payment. His life in St. Mary's City has not become any calmer, as will become clear from what follows. Already in 1668, that is within 2 years after his arrival in St. Mary's City, and still being a Dutchman, he was appointed as member of the board of aldermen in St. Mary's City. The following year, in 1669, Garret van Sweringen, his wife Barbara de Burrell, and their children Elizabeth and Zacharias became naturalized subjects of the English king. A couple of years later, in 1676, his wife Barbara de Burrell died, and the same year Garret remarried with Mary Smith, a young lady from St. Mary's County. On the 5th of October, 1676, the prenuptial agreement was signed, promising Mary a large sum of money in the event of her husband's death. In that time, it was customary in Maryland that amounts of money were expressed in pounds of tobacco. In this case, she would receive 60,000 pounds of tobacco in cash. I did some calculation. I think you can smoke 800 cigarettes a day for the rest of your life. You get 60,000 pounds of tobacco. In December 1672, Garret purchased the inn that were originally owned by William Smith, and therefore known as Smith Ordinary. You can find a nice reconstruction here in historic St. Mary's City, as you can see on the slide. 5 years later, in 1677, he wanted to devote his attention to creating a so-called private lodging house, which is less regulated than an ordinary, and therefore likely to be more profitable, and also starting a brewery. He acquired a building that was used as a meeting place for the governor's council, and once again disaster struck. Smith's Ordinary burned to the ground in 1678, leaving Garret with extensive damage. But even this setback did not stop Garret. He finished his new inn and began to do well, attracting the colony's upper class and becoming one of the most elegant establishments in Maryland. In 1686, Garret van Sweringen was appointed sheriff of St. Mary's County. This did not go completely without a hitch, as is usual in his life. The previous sheriff had forgotten to renew his office. There was also another candidate to whom the office seems to have been promised, but after some hassle, Garret van Sweringen was officially appointed. Maryland was owned and ruled by the Catholic family, the Catholic Calvin family. And gradually more Protestants came to live in Maryland who felt subordinated to Catholics. For example, many or maybe all of the official offices went to Catholics and close relatives of the Calvin family. The new Protestant English king and queen, William III from the Netherlands and Mary, were also not recognized. This led to the Protestant rebellion in Maryland in 1689, and after this successful uprising, all Catholics were removed from their positions, and Garret also lost his job as sheriff of St. Mary's County. So this was again bad luck for him. In 1698, Garret makes his last will. And here you see the beginning of this last will. This is Old English, probably better to read, but I think this is still complicated to read. At least for me, it took some time to get used to the handwriting. He wants to be buried in a Catholic manner, and the priest who will lead the ceremony will get 1,000 pounds of tobacco. He nominates his wife and his son Joseph van Sweringen to be his executors. He assigns the dwelling house and land and also the council rooms and the coffee house, including the land, to his sons Joseph and Charles. You see the words marked in yellow and in blue. On the 4th of February 1699 and also on the 20th of March 1699, when he is no longer alive, witnesses declare that this was the last will and that of Garret van Sweringen, and that Garret was in a healthy mental state when he made it. I think that's the way it works in English colonies. You make your last will, and later on when you die, someone states that it was your last will, and that you're in sound mental health when you did that. Generally, it's assumed that Garret already died in 1698, but if you look at the dates which I mentioned, it could also be the beginning of 1699. He's most likely buried in or around the Catholic Church here in St. Mary's City. So this brings us to the end of the first chapter, the life and adventures of Garret van Sweringen. Before I go to the next chapter, is this you like it so far? Shall I continue? Yeah. Okay. Then we go to his ancestors. But before we dive into his ancestors, it's interesting to have a look at his family. On the slides, you will see Garret van Sweringen in the middle. I told you earlier that he was married twice. First, he was married to Barbara de Burrell, and it's in the article I wrote about it. If you look on the internet, people think she's a daughter of Isaac de Burrell. That's not correct. Isaac de Burrell is her brother. They're both children of Robert de Burrell, and they come from France. From that marriage, they had 5 children. You can see them on the left. Elizabeth, Zacharias, Garret Jr., Mary and Thomas. And he married for the second time with Mary Smith. From this marriage, there are 7 children known: Joseph, Charles, Sarah, Anne, Eleanor, Teresa, and Dorothy. And most of the children of Garret married into well-known Maryland families. Family names you will recognize and you still encounter today, like Carroll is a very well-known name, at least certainly in the 17th century. Names like Ford and Sly are also well-known names. In literature, it's mentioned that at least 4 governors of Maryland are descending from Garret van Sweringen. And I have to admit, I was only able to find 3 of them. Maybe I have to devote some more time to that. The lineage is for all of them via Garret's daughter Anne van Sweringen, who married William Bladen, and who was, among other jobs, he was the Attorney General of Maryland. And if you check on Wikipedia for his other jobs and appointments, this man must have been a workaholic. Just complete of all the jobs he took together. It's really a lot. And Thomas Bladen, the son of Anne van Sweringen, was governor of Maryland. So you see him in blue there. And we have no portrait of him, so I used the coat of arms of that family. And also was her son-in-law Benjamin Tasker, who married her daughter. So Benjamin Tasker was not a descendant of Garret, but he was also a governor of Maryland. And 2 other governors you see on the right side are Benjamin Ogle and Lloyd Lawless Jr. And Benjamin Ogle lived in the Bel Air mansion in Bowies in Maryland, and my wife and I visited that place the day before yesterday. It's a very nice place to go. So we know a lot about his children and their descendants, but his ancestors is a different matter. Over the past 100 years, many people searched for them without much success. I found several letters from American citizens to the Central Bureau for Genealogy in the Netherlands, the CBG, asking for help tracing his parents. For example, here you see a letter from Mrs. Mary Taylor in 1974, stating some information that she has about Garret van Sweringen, requesting for help. You can read that she mentioned that Garret was born in Beamsterdam in 1636. And here you see the reply from the Central Bureau of Genealogy to Mrs. Taylor in 1974. And they replied that they already did a thorough research in 1970, but that they couldn't even find a place called Beamsterdam. So there's a place in the Netherlands called Beamster, but no single trace was found of Garret van Sweringen there. So they replied to Mrs. Taylor that they need more information before they could continue researching, as you can see on this slide. That's almost 50 years ago. So I was wondering in my research, where does this place name Beamsterdam come from? It took some time, but with the help of archives of Maryland online, I could trace the transcription of the record. You see on the left-hand side. A friendly employee of the Maryland State Archives was so kind as to email me a scan of the original record containing this information. You can see on the right side. And I marked in yellow this reference to the place, and you cannot read Amsterdam, it reads something like Reensterdam, which is absolutely nonsense for a place in the Netherlands. Or Reensterdam or Reensterdam, the W is quite unclear in the text. So this trail was not very successful, and I didn't see this going to work in one way or the other to find his ancestors. But I was lucky there was another trail, and I found this very intriguing piece of text on the internet. It refers to a 1933 letter from Paul G. Reptine, which is not a Dutch surname, it should definitely be something like Captain, from Hilversum. It's not a place in the Netherlands, it should be Hilversum. It would be very interesting to see the original letter, but I have no idea what it is. The text is a bit sloppily written, but still provides some useful clues. I've marked the for us most important parts. It refers to a last will of a Mary Van Sweringen, in which he mentions a brother Garret living in Maryland. We also read that there is another notarial document where Mary gives power of attorney to her brother Albert. So on one hand, the text is quite factual, so I could not believe it's fiction. On the other hand, there are also some clear errors. For example, the name of the father of Garret van Sweringen is given here, but that's incorrect. Although I didn't do that at that time. So the question is, where can we find the original notarial documents stating this information? There's no reference to that in these texts, even a reference to the places where Maria and Albert were living. And also, is the information correct? Is there probably more information? I realized that finding these documents would not be easy, and I was most likely not the first person trying to figure out where they were. How could Mr. Captain, or Reptine, have found something that has not been found again in the following almost 100 years? This was the start of an intriguing search that became more or less an obsession for me, I have to admit. But it was good news, and that is that I had encountered this Albert, or Albertus, or Albrecht, sort of similar names in the Netherlands, during my Van Sweringen research. Albert van Sweringen is known to have lived in the city of Haarlem in the Netherlands. He was initially a merchant, but later became a brewer. He was born about 1641 in a village called Rijnzaterwoude. This is beginning to sound like Amsterdam, I think you will notice that. If you say it quickly, Amsterdam, Rijnzaterwoude. And you can also imagine that the clerk writing the deed was not very familiar with these strange sounding Dutch names. Because Albert van Sweringen was a well-established person in Haarlem in the Netherlands, it was possible to find a lot of information about him. And the most important thing of all is that I was able to find the parents of this Albert. So proving that Garret and Albert are brothers will give us the parents of Garret. It was, however, not easy, because I never found Albert mentioned together with any family member. So my conclusion of the previous analysis was that I should start looking for the two deeds mentioned in the letter for Mr. Captain in the notarial archives of Haarlem, the city of Haarlem. And I thought it would be fine to limit the period of time from 1665, when he arrived in Maryland, to about 1700, when he was 2 years dead, and there was some delay in messaging in that time. That means I need to search for about 300 volumes from 22 different notaries, containing more than 12,000 pages. Unfortunately, scans of these notarial records are available online, so you can do all the work from home, otherwise you have to travel to the archive all the times. And luckily, some volumes have a contemporary index in front of them, so that reduces the amount of work that you have to do to get through all of them. And I spent every spare minute I had on this project. And after 2 months of going through all these notarial records, I gone through all the volumes with result. That comes on the next slide. I found the last will of Maria van Sweringen. She was a spinster living in Haarlem, in the Netherlands. And I put a reference to the original records to the top right corner, so no one will have to repeat this elaborate search in the future. And on the slide you see in yellow, and I'll read it in Dutch, but I will show you an English translation later. Aan haar broeder Garret van Sweringen, which means to her brother Garret van Sweringen. And the other part I'll do is with the English translation. See, that's referring to this Maria van Sweringen, bequeaths to her brother Garret van Sweringen, as far as he knows, living currently in Maryland, under the territory of Lord Baltimore in the Virginias. So it's like American people thinking that the Netherlands are part of Germany. In that time, we thought that Maryland was part of Virginia. Sorry for that. Or upon his death, to his surviving children, a sum of 25 guilders. However, if her brother or his children do not arrive here in Patria, so in her homeland, within 10 years after her death, then the same legacy will be assigned to the 2 surviving children of her deceased sister, Anna van Sweringen. Until then, these 25 guilders will remain under her brother, Albertus van Sweringen. So now we get a complete picture of the family, and you'll read that Garret or his descendants had to go back to the Netherlands to collect the money. And as far as we know, they never did that. So there's probably some money left for Van Sweringen descendants in the Netherlands. So with this information, we even have 2 sisters and a brother of Garret. And because the parents of Albert are known, it gives us the following chart of the parents of these children. And on the father of these 4 children is a Klaas Albrecht zoon van Sweringen. And Albrecht zoon, it's a patronymic, it was very common in the Netherlands, means this Klaas is a son of an Albrecht. So it makes, for genealogy in the Netherlands, it makes it much easier to do research, because then you know the first name of the father of Klaas, so it's an Albrecht. And this differs greatly from Maryland, where I've only seen surnames and never encountered these patronymics, which makes research very, very difficult. And their mother, the mother of these children, is a Martijntje Cornelisdochter van Swieten. Cornelis' daughter is meaning she's the daughter of a Cornelis. And she was previously married to a Garret son van Heiningen. Both Van Heiningen and Van Swieten are very old and respected Dutch surnames. And you see that Martijntje kept her own surname during her life. That's also different from Maryland, where based on English habits, the surname of a woman changed to the surname of her husband after the marriage. So that didn't happen in the Netherlands at that time. That makes it easier to find the parents of a lady. In the Netherlands, naming conventions for children were very common in the 17th century. So this normally means that children receive the name of a close relative. Sons, for example, were often named after the father of their father. And it's very likely that in the case of Garret van Sweringen, he is named after and in honor of the former husband of his mother, Garret van Sweringen. So, about this Klaas Albrecht van Sweringen, I was able to find much more information. He lived in Rijnzaterwoude, so that was his Amsterdam, but then in Dutch it's Rijnzaterwoude, and I will show you later on where it is in the Netherlands. He was a cloth merchant in Rijnzaterwoude. He also owned land in that region, I think as an investment, and he died in 1647 and his wife 6 years later. They were both buried in the church of Rijnzaterwoude. The tombstone remained until 50 years ago. I have the text that was on the tombstone, but then it disappeared. So I don't know where it. How do you hide the tombstone? I don't know. Probably recycled or something like that. And Garret was only 16 years old when both his parents were deceased. From that moment onwards, he probably lived with a family member. That was quite common in the Netherlands. Possibly his half-brother William Garret van Heiningen, who was a clothes merchant in Rijnzaterwoude. And as you can see on this 17th century figure of Rijnzaterwoude, it's a very friendly village. There's a big church, as most Dutch villages had at that time. And you can still visit this village and see how people lived there in that time. So where did they live? And I already mentioned the place named Rijnzaterwoude several times, so I think you might be interested to understand where it is. On the slide, you see to the left a map of the Netherlands, and I zoomed in on the province of South Holland. And you can see the village of Rijnzaterwoude, where the father of Garret lived, the yellow circle. So Klaas Albertson van Sweringen lived there. And also his daughter and the sister of Garret, Anna van Sweringen, lived in Rijnzaterwoude. His brother Albert and sister Maria, you see, lived in Haarlem, the city of Haarlem. You see them in the top left corner of that map. And you can also see a village called Wouwbrugge and a name Albrecht. And that's, I will come to that later, because that's the village where Albrecht or Albert, the grandfather of Garret van Sweringen, lived. And here you see a 17th century map of Rijnzaterwoude. It's very surprising, astonishing that from a very small village as Rijnzaterwoude we have 17th century maps, but from St. Mary's city there are hardly any maps or no maps left. Very sorry for that, but I think we have maps from 17th century maps from all villages, how small they are in the Netherlands. Yeah. So this is Rijnzaterwoude. As you can see, a small village next to a big lake. This big lake still exists, it's used for water sports. And there's a main road right next to the lake, crossing the village from north to south. And there the father of Garret lived and did his business. So that is the Herenweg. And yeah, he lived in one of the houses depicted. I don't know yet which one, but I hope to find out one day which house it was. And here we have a piece of land owned by the father of Garret, Klaas Albertson van Sweringen. And he had a piece of land next to the lake. And you see on this map, the north is to the right bottom corner. So you have to turn your head a little bit. And then the main road that went from north to south on the previous slide is now going from left to right. And in the middle, the third piece of land, and I hope you can read it. It reads Klaas Albertson van Sweringen. So that's a piece of land that he owned in Rijnzaterwoude. And we're very lucky that this piece of information was, well saved over time. Yeah. And now that we know the name of the parents of Garret van Sweringen, the question arises, can we find his grandparents van Sweringen? And indeed we can. His parents are named Albrecht Hendrikszoon van Sweringen and Maritgen Klaasdochter. Maritgen is Dutch form of Maria. And Klaas is like Nicholas in English. And Hendrikszoon is like Henry in English, but I used the Dutch names for that. And among other children, they had 3 sons. One of them is Klaas Albertson van Sweringen, the cloth merchant in Rijnzaterwoude. He's the father of Garret. Albert had a son Hendrik, and he is the court messenger in Warmond. I started with his name in the beginning of my lecture. He's the ancestor of the old friend of mine, descends from this Hendrik Albertson van Sweringen, and he's an uncle of Garret, and also brother Jan Albertson van Sweringen, who was an innkeeper in Delfshaven, a city near Delft or near Rotterdam in the Netherlands. So this innkeeping capabilities from Garret probably came from his uncle Jan. So this Albert Hendrikszoon van Sweringen lived in Wouwbrugge. And he was born about 1580. Like his son Klaas, he was a cloth merchant. He was also called Koopman Albrecht. That's meaning merchant Albrecht. If you translate it to English, merchant Albert. He died in 1631, and his wife survived him at least 25 years. And on the right side, you see an impression of how Wouwbrugge, this village of Wouwbrugge looked like in the 17th century. And the church is here also an important part of this drawing. And you can imagine that Albrecht van Sweringen lived in one of the houses depicted on this picture. The oldest reference of Albrecht van Sweringen I was able to find was in the land registers of Wouwbrugge in 1616. He owns about 31 acres of land. It's in Dutch, you read 2 morgen 1 hond. That's the measurements in the Netherlands. But if you do some arithmetic, it's 31 acres of land. I've not found any traces of the family before 1616. The grandfather of Garret might have come from elsewhere, probably the village of Sweringen in Germany. The Van in the Dutch name normally means coming from, or usually means coming from. So Van Sweringen probably means coming from the city of Schwieringen in Germany. And now that we know that his parents lived in Rijnzaterwoude, you might wonder, is Garret ever mentioned in the archive there? And in fact, there are a couple of references. In the land records of Rijnzaterwoude, he's mentioned with about 2.5 acres of land, which he must have inherited from his parents. So even living in Maryland, he still owned a little piece of land in his homeland. So this brings me to the end of my lecture. I hope you enjoyed it, and thank you for your attention.
I believe that he was Catholic, but is there any evidence, did he convert, or is there a family tradition of being Catholic in the Netherlands?
Yeah, I think so. I think the predominant religion in the Netherlands was Protestant at that time, but there were still, let's say, 10-20% of the people remained Catholic. And for example, his brother Albert is known to be Catholic. We know it from his last will. And also the first husband of his mother, this Garret van Sweringen. Van Sweringen is a well-known Catholic family in the Netherlands. So there are many signals that his family is Catholic. I haven't found it from his parents. No information that they were Catholic. Surprising is they were buried in the church of Rijnzaterwoude, which is a Protestant church. But that happens more often. The Catholic people were buried in a Protestant church. Because there were not much Catholic churches and they want to be buried in. Yeah. Yes.
Yes, Garrett's wife, I have always seen her name as Barbara de Barrett.
Yeah.
We have Burrell.
Yeah.
Okay, have we been crossing those L's for the last 200
That's
years?
that's a very good question. Because I see in the archives sometimes it's really written as Barrett. But if you look at the original sources in the Netherlands where they are mentioned, or in Newer Amstel, it's always Burrell. So I have reason to believe that Burrell is the original and the right name, but sometimes it's mixed up with Barrett. Yeah. And yeah. Yes.
Do they meet here in the colonies, like in Newer Amstel? And do we know what she was doing here as a single woman?
It's a very good question. I wish I would know that. It's
Isn't that
very,
well?
yeah, it's very surprising that you have the impression that a single lady like Barbara de Burrell from a good standing comes to a colony for what reason? I don't know. I'd like to find out. Maybe she came together with her brother Isaac, and I find somewhere a Peter de Burrell. That Garret van Sweringen gives power of attorney to his brother, must be his brother-in-law, to his brother Peter de Burrell. So there was also a Peter de Burrell in I think at first in Newer Amstel, but also in Maryland. And I'd like to find more about this Burrell family, but it's very difficult. And I told you I found the father of Robert Burrell, it's Robert de Burrell, and he must have lived in Maastricht, the city of the Netherlands. And also Isaac de Burrell somewhere states that he was born in Haarlem in the Netherlands. So we know Albertus and Maria van Sweringen come from Haarlem. So I will devote some time to try to find more about the Burrell family, but I think it will be hard. Yeah. It's like is it Mary Smith, his second wife? Where does he come from? Also ladies. Probably she's maybe 16, 18 years old. She's very young at the time of the marriage. Where did they come from? Why did they went to Maryland? And then this antenuptial agreement, she gets so much tobacco, so she must have something to offer herself. Property or must be a very beautiful lady, I don't know. Yeah.
But have you found any correspondence from either he or his wife back to family?
No, I wish I would have found that. Yeah. No, not at all. No.
And was that typical?
It is typical, yeah, there's not much correspondence left. What we have in the Netherlands, there's a collection, it's in the British archives, of a lot of letters that were conquered when the British took over Dutch ships, and they stole the post of their ships, and they brought all these letters to the archives in London or there in the neighborhood, and it's still there, and people are researching these letters. There are a lot of letters from the Netherlands. For example, we know from a family called Vroman. They live in the Netherlands, and there are a couple of letters in that collection. But there are so many letters, and it's not indexed, so it takes a lot of time to research, and then you have to be lucky to find such a letter. So at the moment, no, we have nothing. Yeah.
Yeah.
But if you find somewhere in your house some information, you're a descendant of Garrett, always happy to receive that. Yeah. So
How common were pre-nuptial agreements?
how common? Yeah, but maybe question you can ask it here.
Not all that common.
Not that common, no.
I've seen more of them than. From Europe, it wasn't. The first one in Delaware.
Yeah.
There's a prenup. She married him. It's, I just regarded it from the common thing amongst the Dutch and the French. Esther.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I think in the Netherlands, when people are well-to-do, it's quite common to make these agreements in advance. Yeah. Only, let's say, rich people did that. When you have nothing, you don't make an agreement about it. But you have property, and especially when there's difference in property, one is a very much, the other is little, then they make those agreements. There are a lot of them, and they're normally passed for a notary. They go to a notary, they together with friends from both sides, and then they sign this agreement.
It's very common in French Canada,
And French Canada. So,
the notary and marriage.
are there any notaries here in Maryland in the 17th century? I didn't find them. No notaries, no. Yes.
Do you know if the roles and responsibilities of the appointed sheriff were different in Dutch colonies versus what he would have done here in the English colony?
Whoa, I know there are differences. I have to think very hard what the differences are. I think the schout of the sheriff in the Dutch colonies was more also the prosecutor. So if there was a legal case, they can bring someone to court. I think that's different from Maryland or the English system, where the sheriff does not have that responsibility. And the sheriff in the Netherlands normally is the one who signs deeds when land is transported to someone else. He's the one who signs it or seals it. Yeah, so it's also let's say a governmental role in land transport or in other. And if someone makes a statement, he can go to a sheriff and he can sign it. He does it under oath, and then the sheriff signs it to be a legal document. Yeah.
Do you know what happened with the land he owned back in the Netherlands while he was living in Maryland?
Yes, I was very curious about it. What happened? Did some heirs come up in the Netherlands to claim the land? And I was not able to find it. There are land records of Rijnsdijk. I went through that page by page to see if I could find any reference, and it was a lot of work also. I didn't find anything. The land disappeared somewhere. It belonged to someone else at a certain moment, but I don't know. Yeah.
We know that Garret Van Sweringen and Mary had connections, business connections all over the Atlantic world. We know that they held enslaved peoples in their home. I was curious if you came across in your research any evidence of those business ties and anything about their engagement in the slave trade.
Yeah, I have some slides about it. I take up slide. It's maybe interest to share. I have no signs at all that Garrett was involved in slave trade. Not at all. He was more, I think, in the tobacco and running his inn and things like that. That was his main business. So no signs at all of trading. But he had some slaves and indentured servants. And this is from his from the inventory after his death. And you can see that he had one Negro man named Paul, one other named William, a servant boy, about 1 year and 8 months to serve, one servant woman named Eliza Davis, another servant woman 5 years to serve. Names was not filled in. So it's quite shocking, I think, we all of that have this feeling when you read this. Next to the cattle and the furniture, you read people mentioned as enslaved people in these old records. So he had a couple of slaves, but he was not trading in that. That's what I think. Other questions?
Well, I would like to say that we have all benefited from your obsession. Years of work. Thank you.
It was my pleasure to be here, and I'm continuing this research, let's say continuing this obsession. So maybe in a couple of years I'll give you an update with more stories about Mr. Van Sweringen and his life and family. Yeah.
Thank you.